The Iranian plateau stretches endlessly beneath a sky so vast, it seems to swallow time itself. Here, where the land rises toward distant mountain ranges and falls away into salt deserts that shimmer like mirages, the bones of an ancient world lie scattered across thousands of miles. The Zagros Mountains cut through the western edge of this plateau, like the spine of some sleeping giant, their peaks dusted with snow even in summer, their valleys cradling rivers that have carved pathways through stone for millions of years. To the east, the deserts of Dasht-e-Kavir and Dasht-e-Lut spread out in silence, vast expanses of salt flats and sand, where nothing grows, where the wind sculpts dunes into temporary monuments that shift and vanish with each season. Between these extremes, in the valleys and foothills, life has always found a way. Springs bubble up from underground aquifers, turning patches of arid land into oases of green. Villages cling to the edges of rivers, their mud brick walls blending so completely with the earth that from a distance they seem part of the landscape itself. This is a land that has seen empires rise and fall, that has been crossed by armies and merchants, by prophets and poets, by nameless wanderers whose stories dissolved into the dust long ago. The Iranian plateau has always been a crossroads, a place where civilizations met and mingled, where ideas and goods flowed across trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world to Central Asia, India to Mesopotamia. The geography itself demanded movement, adaptation, survival. Those who lived here learned to read the land, to find water where outsiders saw only desolation, to navigate mountain passes that closed with winter snows and opened again in spring. They built cities in the valleys, constructed elaborate irrigation systems to channel water to their fields, raised temples to gods whose names are now mostly forgotten. And in time, from among the many peoples who inhabited this plateau, one group would rise to forge an empire larger than any the ancient world had yet seen. The story of Persia begins not with conquest, but with memory, with the deep accumulation of human presence in a landscape that shaped those who lived within it. Long before the Achaemenids, before Cyrus or Darius, other peoples made their homes here. The Elamites built a sophisticated civilization in the lowlands of what is now southwestern Iran, their capital at Susa flourishing for thousands of years as a center of trade and culture. Their cuneiform tablets speak of kings and priests, of tribute paid and temples built, of a world that thrived in the shadows of Mesopotamia but developed its own distinct character. To the north and west, the Medes emerged as a powerful confederation of tribes, their kings ruling from the city of Ecbatana in the mountains. Greek sources speak of the Medes with a mixture of respect and fascination, describing their elaborate court ceremonies, their skill as horsemen and archers, their ability to unite disparate peoples under a single banner. But it was among the pastoral tribes of the southern plateau, in the region the Greeks called Persis, and we now know as Fars, that the seeds of empire were planted. Here, in valleys watered by seasonal streams, among people who raised sheep and goats and horses, who lived in tents part of the year in villages. The rest, a clan called the Achaemenids, traced their lineage back to a semi-mythical ancestor named Achaemenids. They were part of the larger Persian people, speakers of an Indo-European language, related to Sanskrit, and later to most of the languages of Europe. They were not city dwellers by tradition, not builders of great monuments, or keepers of extensive written records. They were in many ways the kind of people who moved through history, leaving few traces, who lived close to the land and measured wealth in livestock and pasture rights, and the loyalty of kinsmen. And yet from these beginnings, something extraordinary would emerge. The Achaemenids would transform themselves from tribal leaders into kings of kings, from shepherds of flocks to shepherds of nations. They would build cities that astounded visitors from across the known world, establish administrative systems of remarkable sophistication, and create an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the shores of the Mediterranean, from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of Egypt. How this transformation occurred, how a people with no tradition of monumental architecture or imperial bureaucracy accomplished what the much older civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt had never quite managed, remains one of the great questions of ancient history. Part of the answer lies in the landscape itself, in the plateau that taught adaptability and resilience, that rewarded those who could move quickly across vast distances, who could integrate diverse peoples and traditions without losing their own identity. The wind that blows across the Iranian plateau today carries with it the dust of millennia. It whistles through the ruins of cities that once housed tens of thousands. It scours the faces of stone reliefs carved by artisans, whose names we will never know. It moves over battlefields, where armies clashed, and over trade routes, where caravans once passed loaded with silk and spices and ideas. To stand in this landscape is to feel the weight of deep time, to sense the presence of all those who came before, who looked up at the same mountains and stars, who struggled and thrived and left their marks, some permanent, most fading, on the face of the earth. The Persian Empire that would rise here in the 6th century BC was not an accident of history, not a sudden eruption of power from nowhere. It was, instead, the culmination of thousands of years of human experience on this plateau, the product of geography and culture and circumstance, of individual ambition and collective memory. In the highlands of Fars, where winter brings snow to the peaks, and spring transforms the valleys into carpets of wildflowers, the ruins of an ancient city still stand. Pasargadae is not an imposing sight, not a place that overwhelms with its grandeur or scale. Instead, it offers something quieter, more contemplative, a scattering of stone platforms and columns across a wide plain, a palace complex that once hosted kings and courtiers now reduced to foundations and fragments. And at the center of it all, rising from the grass like an island in a sea of green, a simple tomb. 6 broad steps lead up to a small chamber with a peaked roof, the whole structure built from massive blocks of pale limestone fitted together without mortar. No inscription identifies the occupant, though later legends and the testimony of ancient writers leave little doubt. This is the tomb of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, the man who transformed a regional power into a superpower, who conquered kingdoms that had stood for centuries and forged them into something new. Cyrus was born, according to tradition, around 600 BC, though the exact date remains uncertain. His grandfather was Cyrus I, a king of Persis, who ruled as a vassal of the Medes. His father, Cambyses I, continued this subordinate relationship, marrying a Median princess named Mandane, to cement the alliance. From this union came Cyrus II, who would be known to history simply as Cyrus, or in the Greek sources Kyros. The story of his early life quickly enters the realm of legend. Herodotus, writing more than a century after the events, relates an elaborate tale. The Median king Astyages, having dreamed that his daughter's son would overthrow him, ordered the infant Cyrus to be killed. The task fell to a nobleman named Harpagus, who instead gave the baby to a shepherd to raise in secret. Years later, when the truth emerged, Astyages punished Harpagus by serving him his own son at a banquet, and Harpagus, burning for revenge, encouraged the grown Cyrus to rebel. How much of this can be believed is impossible to say. The story follows patterns common to many cultures: the threatened infant who survives, the prophecy that fulfills itself despite attempts to prevent it, the hidden prince who rises to claim his destiny. What we know with more certainty is that, around 550 BC, Cyrus did rebel against his Median overlord, and that in a series of battles lasting 3 years, he defeated Astyages and took control of the Median kingdom. This was not simply a palace coup or a change of dynasty. Cyrus transformed the very nature of rule, creating a synthesis of Persian and Median traditions that would become the foundation of Achaemenid power. He kept Ecbatana as an administrative center, incorporated Median nobles into his government, adopted aspects of Median court ceremony, and presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate successor to the Median kings, the unifier of the Iranian peoples. With Media under his control, Cyrus turned his attention westward. The kingdom of Lydia, in what is now western Turkey, was ruled by Croesus, a king whose wealth had become proverbial. The Lydians had invented coinage, minting gold and silver pieces, that facilitated trade across the eastern Mediterranean. Croesus, concerned by the rise of Persian power, consulted the oracle at Delphi, which famously told him that if he attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Emboldened, Croesus invaded, and in the resulting war around 547 BC, Cyrus defeated the Lydian forces and besieged Sardis, the capital. When the city fell, Cyrus captured Croesus and, according to legend, spared his life. The oracle's prophecy had been fulfilled. Croesus had indeed destroyed a great empire, his own. The conquest of Lydia brought Cyrus into contact with the Greek city-states of Ionia, on the Aegean coast. These wealthy trading cities, including Miletus and Ephesus, came under Persian control, paying tribute and accepting Persian-appointed governors, while retaining considerable local autonomy. This pattern, direct conquest, followed by indirect rule through local elites, would become characteristic of Persian imperial administration. Cyrus understood, perhaps instinctively, that empires built solely on force were brittle, that lasting power required accommodation, integration, a willingness to work with rather than against the grain of local traditions. He was not interested in erasing conquered peoples, in forcing them to become Persian. Instead, He sought to make them loyal subjects of a larger whole, to convince them that Persian rule offered stability, protection, prosperity. The greatest prize still lay to the south. Babylon, ancient and wealthy, ruled by Nabonidus, a king who had alienated his own priesthood by favoring the moon god.
Sin over Marduk, the traditional patron deity of the city.
In 539 BC, Cyrus invaded Mesopotamia. The campaign was swift. The Babylonian forces were defeated at Opis, on the Tigris, and the city of Babylon itself opened its gates without a fight.
Cyrus entered in triumph,
presenting himself as the liberator chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship. The famous Cyrus cylinder, a clay document inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, records this event in propagandistic terms. Cyrus as the righteous king who returned the statues of gods to their proper temples, who did not terrorize the population, who ruled with wisdom and justice. Modern scholars debate how much of this represents genuine policy and how much is royal spin, but there is no doubt that Cyrus understood the power of symbolism and religious legitimacy. With Babylon under his control, Cyrus ruled an empire that stretched from the Aegean to the Persian Gulf, from the Caucasus Mountains to the Arabian Desert. He had accomplished in less than 2 decades what had taken the Assyrians and Egyptians centuries to build, and he did it in large part by being unlike those earlier empire builders, by avoiding the mass deportations and brutal reprisals that had characterized Assyrian rule, by allowing conquered peoples to keep their religions and many of their customs, by presenting himself as the rightful king of each region, rather than as a foreign conqueror. This was not simply enlightened policy, it was pragmatic. Cyrus lacked the administrative apparatus to micromanage a vast empire. By co-opting local elites, by respecting local traditions, he created a system that could function without requiring Persian officials in every corner of the realm. In 530 BC, Cyrus died campaigning on the northeastern frontier, against nomadic tribes, perhaps the Massagetae. Though sources differ, his body was brought back to Pasargadae and placed in the tomb that still stands today. According to Plutarch, an inscription once graced the entrance: "O man, whoever you are, and wherever you come from, for I know you will come, I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not therefore begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my bones." Whether these words were ever actually carved there is uncertain, no trace of them survives, but the sentiment captures something essential about how Cyrus was remembered. Not as a god, not as an all-conquering tyrant, but as a man who built something lasting, who asked only to be remembered. The tomb stands today much as it did 2.5 millennia ago, though weathered by time and wind, though stripped of whatever treasures it once held by looters in the chaotic centuries after the empire's fall. It is a modest monument by the standards of later Persian kings, let alone by the standards of Egyptian pharaohs with their pyramids and rock-cut tombs. But perhaps that modesty is fitting. Cyrus founded an empire, but he did not yet know what that empire would become, did not have the bureaucratic machinery or architectural vocabulary of his successors. He remained in some sense a tribal king who happened to conquer half the known world, a man who straddled the boundary between the pastoral past and the imperial future. Around his tomb, the ruins of Pasargadae speak of this transitional moment. Palaces with columns, showing clear Lydian and Greek influence, gardens fed by sophisticated irrigation systems, audience halls, where subject kings came to pay homage. And beyond it all, the wide plain, the distant mountains, the sky that seems to go on forever. The wind moves through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of wild herbs and dust. Visitors come here now, Iranian families on holiday, occasional tourists from abroad, archaeologists still working to understand the site's layout and chronology. They walk among the fallen stones. They climb the steps to peer into the dark chamber of Cyrus's tomb. They take photographs against the backdrop of the mountains. Some come out of historical interest, some out of nationalist pride. For modern Iranians, Cyrus remains a potent symbol of national greatness, of a time when their ancestors ruled an empire that stretched across much of the known world. Others come simply because the place is beautiful, because there is something compelling about these old stones standing in the midst of empty country, something that speaks to the persistence of human ambition and the inevitable fading of even the greatest achievements. When Cyrus died, the empire passed to his son, Cambyses II. The new king faced the challenge all heirs face, establishing his own legitimacy, proving himself worthy of his father's legacy. For Cambyses, this meant conquest. The one major power in the region that had not yet fallen to Persian arms was Egypt, the ancient kingdom of the Nile, wealthy from agriculture and trade, protected by desert to east and west, seemingly secure behind its traditional borders. In 525 BC, Cambyses launched an invasion. He marched his army across the Sinai Peninsula, a feat of logistics that required establishing supply depots and securing the cooperation of Arab tribes who controlled the wells and oases. The decisive battle came at Pelusium, the fortified city guarding the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. Egyptian sources are mostly silent about the battle, but Greek historians like Herodotus claim that Cambyses used a clever psychological tactic, placing cats and other animals sacred to the Egyptians in the front ranks of his army, knowing the defenders would hesitate to harm them. Whether this is true, or merely a good story, the Persians won. The Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik III fled to Memphis, where he was captured and later executed, though some sources say he committed suicide. Egypt became a Persian province, a satrapy, ruled by a governor, appointed from Susa or Persepolis. Cambyses took the traditional titles of the pharaohs, had himself crowned in the ancient rituals, and attempted, with varying degrees of success, to present himself as the legitimate successor to Egypt's long line of divine kings. But Egypt was not Babylon. The Egyptians had a much stronger sense of their own antiquity and uniqueness, a much deeper resentment of foreign rule, and Cambyses, unlike his father, seems to have lacked the political sensitivity necessary to win over his new subjects. Greek sources portray him as increasingly erratic, committing sacrilege against Egyptian gods, killing the sacred Apis bull, violating temples. How much of this is true, and how much is hostile propaganda, is difficult to determine. Egyptian sources from the period are sparse, and what survives is often contradictory. What is certain is that Cambyses attempted to expand further, sending expeditions to Nubia, and allegedly to the oasis of Siwa, home to the famous oracle of Amun. These campaigns ended in disaster. The Nubian expedition was forced to turn back due to lack of supplies, and the army sent to Siwa is said to have vanished entirely in a sandstorm, though no archaeological evidence of this lost army has ever been found, despite modern searches. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing back in Persia. A man claiming to be Cambyses' brother Bardia, whom Cambyses had secretly killed, seized the throne. Whether this was actually Bardia, or an impostor named Gomata, a Median priest who resembled the dead prince, would be hotly debated by later Persian sources. Cambyses, learning of the usurpation, began the march back to Persia but died on the way under mysterious circumstances. Some sources say from an infected wound, others hint at suicide or assassination. The Egyptian interlude left a complicated legacy. For the Egyptians, it marked the beginning of 2 centuries of Persian rule, interrupted by brief periods of independence, a time they remembered with little fondness. For the Persians, it demonstrated both the possibilities and the limits of expansion. Egypt brought wealth, grain from the Nile fed Persian armies, and Egyptian craftsmen would contribute to the construction of later Persian palaces. But it also brought problems. Distance from the imperial heartland made control difficult, and the proud Egyptians never fully reconciled themselves to foreign rule, rebelling whenever Persian attention was focused elsewhere. The Nile, that great river that had nurtured one of humanity's oldest civilizations, now flowed through a Persian province, its temples maintained by priests who performed ancient rituals in the name of kings who lived thousands of miles away on the Iranian plateau. In the desert west of the Nile Delta, in places where the sand stretches unbroken to the horizon, it is still possible to imagine the lost army of Cambyses, 50,000 men swallowed by a sandstorm, buried beneath dunes that shift and migrate with the wind. Modern expeditions have searched for traces of this army, bones, weapons, anything to confirm or refute the story. But the desert keeps its secrets. Perhaps the army never existed. Perhaps it was a later invention, a way to explain Cambyses' failure to secure complete control over Egypt's western frontier. Or perhaps somewhere out there, beneath meters of sand, a vast graveyard lies waiting to be discovered, a testament to the hubris of empire and the indifference of nature. The desert has always been a boundary, a place where ambition comes up against the hard limits of human endurance. The Persians learned this, as others would after them, that there are places where even the greatest armies falter, where the logistics of supply and the hostility of the environment make conquest impossible. With Cambyses dead, and the empire thrown into turmoil, a new figure emerged to seize control. Darius, a member of a collateral branch of the Achaemenid family, a spear-bearing Cambyses' army, returned to Persia, and with the help of 6 other noble conspirators, killed the usurper and claimed the throne. According to the official version of events, the version Darius himself commissioned in a massive trilingual inscription, carved into a cliff face at Behistun. The man they killed was not Bardia, but an impostor, a magus named Gomata, who had deceived the empire. Whether this was true, or merely a convenient justification for what was essentially a coup, has been debated ever since. What matters is that Darius won, that he secured the loyalty of enough of the army and nobility to make his claim stick, and that he then faced a wave of rebellions across the empire as various regions and subject peoples, sensing weakness, attempted to break away. The Behistun inscription, carved high on a limestone cliff in western Iran, records Darius's version of these events in remarkable detail. Written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, the text describes 19 rebellions that Darius suppressed in a single year. Battles fought across thousands of miles, from Elam to Armenia, from Parthia to Egypt. The inscription is accompanied by a large relief, showing Darius standing with his foot on the chest of the defeated Gaumata. Other rebel leaders brought before him in chains, the god Ahura Mazda floating above, bestowing divine approval. It is propaganda, certainly, a carefully crafted image of legitimate authority, triumphing over chaos and deceit. But it is also an extraordinary historical document, providing names, dates, and details that can be cross-referenced with other sources. And it served a practical purpose, placed along the royal road, where travelers and officials could see it. It announced to all that Darius ruled by right, that resistance was futile, that the empire was unified under his command. Darius I would rule for 36 years, from 522 to 486 BC. And in that time, he would transform the Persian Empire from a collection of conquered territories into a sophisticated administrative state. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap appointed by the king. These satraps had considerable power. They collected taxes, maintained order, raised troops when needed. But they were also carefully monitored by royal officials who reported directly to the king, and by inspectors known as the king's eyes and ears, who traveled throughout the empire, checking on local administration. This system of checks and balances helped prevent the satrapies from becoming independent power bases, though it did not eliminate that risk entirely, as later Persian history would demonstrate. Darius standardized coinage throughout the empire, introducing the gold daric and the silver siglos, which facilitated trade and made tax collection more efficient. He established a regular postal system along the royal road, which ran from Susa in the east to Sardis in the west, a distance of some 1,600 miles. Way stations were established at intervals, providing fresh horses and provisions for royal messengers who could cover the entire route in about a week, far faster than any ordinary traveler. Darius also undertook massive construction projects, most famously at Persepolis, the ceremonial capital he founded in the highlands of Fars, unlike Pasargadae, which retained the character of a tribal center enlarged but not fundamentally transformed. Persepolis was conceived from the beginning as an imperial showplace, a stage for the ritual affirmation of royal power and the empire's unity. The site Darius chose for Persepolis was a natural terrace, backed by mountains, overlooking the plain of Mavdasht. Workers cut into the rock face, creating an artificial platform some 40 feet high, 500,000 square feet in area. On this platform, using massive blocks of limestone and mud brick, they built palaces, audience halls, treasuries, and barracks. The centerpiece was the Epidana, an enormous columned hall where the king received foreign delegations and held the annual New Year festival. The construction took decades, continuing under Darius's successors, employing craftsmen and laborers from across the empire: Babylonian brickmakers, Egyptian stonemasons, Greek sculptors, Median metalworkers. Inscriptions at the site list the materials brought from distant provinces: cedar from Lebanon, gold from Sardis, lapis lazuli from Sogdiana, ivory from India and Ethiopia. Persepolis was meant to embody the empire itself, to demonstrate the king's ability to command resources and peoples from across the known world. The Apadana is approached by monumental staircases, carved with relief sculptures of extraordinary refinement. Delegations from across the empire ascend the stairs, each group identifiable by their distinctive clothing and the gifts they bring. Medes in their characteristic rounded caps, Armenians leading horses, Bactrians with camels, Indians carrying baskets of gold, Ethiopians with ivory tusks and okapi. The procession seems eternal, frozen in stone, a perpetual reenactment of the moment when representatives of all the empire's peoples came to acknowledge the king's authority and receive his favor in return. The figures are carved with remarkable attention to detail: the folds of garments, the musculature of animals, the individual features of faces, and yet there is also a stylized quality, a formality that emphasizes order and hierarchy rather than individuality. This is not art for art's sake. but political theatre rendered permanent, a visualization of imperial ideology. To walk through Persepolis today is to move through a carefully constructed landscape of power. The ruins are extensive, covering about 33 acres, though much was destroyed when Alexander the Great burned the site in 330 BC. What remains are columns, some still standing to their full height of 65 feet, staircases, doorways, fragments of walls. The site is popular with visitors, both Iranians and foreigners, who come to marvel at the scale and craftsmanship, to try to imagine what the place looked like when it was intact, when the columns supported massive wooden roofs, when the walls were painted in bright colors, when the courtyards filled with courtiers and guards and foreign envoys. In spring, when the plain is green and wildflowers bloom in the crevices of the ancient stones, Persepolis can seem almost alive again, as if the weight of history concentrated here might somehow manifest the past into the present. But Persepolis was always more symbol than substance, more theatre than seat of government. The real work of running the empire happened at Susa and Babylon, at Ecbatana and the satrapal capitals scattered across the provinces. Darius spent much of his reign on the move, traveling from palace to palace, reviewing troops, meeting with officials, responding to crises. The empire was too vast to be governed from a single location, too diverse to be controlled through uniform policies. Success required flexibility, pragmatism, a willingness to adapt to local conditions while maintaining the core structures of imperial authority. Darius seems to have understood this intuitively. He incorporated elements of earlier Mesopotamian and Egyptian administrative practices, borrowed architectural styles from the Greeks and Lydians, adopted religious tolerance as a principle of governance, not out of idealism, but out of necessity. An empire that attempted to impose cultural uniformity on peoples stretching from the Indus to the Mediterranean would have torn itself apart. Yet Darius was not content with consolidation. Like his predecessors, he sought to expand, to push the boundaries of Persian power ever outward. In the east, he campaigned successfully in the Indus Valley, incorporating parts of what is now Pakistan into the empire. These territories brought access to trade routes into India and provided soldiers. Indian troops would serve in Persian armies for centuries, valued for their skill with bow and spear. To the north, Darius launched an expedition against the Scythians, the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe. This campaign, probably occurring around 513 BC, was a disaster. The Persians crossed the Danube River with a massive army, perhaps 70,000 strong, and marched into Scythian territory. But the Scythians refused to fight a set-piece battle. Instead, they retreated, burning the land behind them, poisoning wells, attacking Persian supply lines. Darius pursued them deep into the steppe, farther and farther from his supply bases, until finally he was forced to turn back, his army exhausted and depleted by disease and skirmishes. The Scythian campaign taught Darius the limits of conventional military power, against an enemy who would not stand and fight, who could melt away into vast empty spaces and reappear to strike when least expected. Even the greatest army was at a disadvantage. The steppe was a harsh teacher. Its distances were too great, its resources too sparse to support a large invading force for long, and the nomadic peoples who lived there, people who grew up on horseback and could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop, were perfectly adapted to their environment in a way settled peoples could never be. The Persians would maintain a presence on the western edge of the steppe, controlling important trade routes and collecting tribute from some of the tribes along the Black Sea coast. But they would never fully conquer the steppes, never extend their authority into that vast grassland that stretched from the Carpathians to Mongolia. To the west, Darius's attention increasingly focused on Greece. The Greek city-states had been part of the Persian sphere since the conquest of Lydia, but they were a constant source of trouble. In 499 BC, the Ionian cities revolted, burning Sardis and asking for help from the Greek mainland. Athens and Eretria sent ships and troops, a decision they would come to regret. Darius suppressed the revolt after 6 years of fighting, burning Miletus and deporting many of its citizens. But he did not forget the intervention of Athens and Eretria. In 490 BC, he sent an expedition across the Aegean with orders to punish those cities and, if possible, to add Greece to the empire. The fleet sailed from island to island, receiving the submission of most, destroying Eretria. Then they landed on the plain of Marathon, about 26 miles from Athens, where an Athenian army of about 10,000 men awaited them. The Battle of Marathon has been recounted so many times, has taken on such mythic significance in Western culture, that it is difficult to see it clearly. For the Athenians, it was an existential moment, a tiny city-state standing alone against the might of the Persian Empire. For Darius, it was a minor punitive expedition, one of many military operations happening simultaneously across his vast domain. The Athenians charged the Persian lines, broke through, and drove them back to their ships. Casualties were heavy on the Persian side, light on the Greek. The Persians sailed away, their mission unaccomplished. For Athens, it was a stunning victory, proof that Greek hoplites could defeat Persian forces in open battle, a source of pride that would be celebrated for centuries. For Darius, it was an irritation, a reminder that Greece would require a larger commitment of resources. He began planning a much bigger invasion, but in 486 BC, before it could be launched, he died. The empire passed to his son, Xerxes IV. Xerxes inherited his father's ambitions along with his throne. After suppressing revolts in Egypt and Babylon, revolts that broke out, as they so often did, at moments of transition between rulers, he turned his attention to Greece. The invasion he planned was to be on a scale unprecedented, even in Persian history. According to Herodotus, the army numbered in the millions, though modern historians consider this a gross exaggeration. A more realistic estimate might be 100,000 to 200,000 soldiers, still an enormous force for the time. The logistics alone was staggering. To cross the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, Persian engineers constructed 2 pontoon bridges by lashing together hundreds of ships. When a storm destroyed the first bridges, Xerxes, according to Greek sources, ordered the sea whipped as punishment, a story that may be apocryphal but captures the image of Persian power and hubris that would dominate Greek accounts. The army crossed into Europe in 480 BC and began the long march southward through Thrace and Macedonia. Most cities along the route submitted without a fight, providing supplies and troops as required. The Greeks, meanwhile, were divided. Some city-states chose to submit to Persia, offering earth and water as tokens of their subjugation. Others, led by Athens and Sparta, decided to resist. The Persian advance was methodical, overwhelming. At Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass, a small Greek force, led by the Spartan king Leonidas, held out for 3 days before being outflanked and annihilated. The road to central Greece lay open. Xerxes marched on Athens, which had been evacuated, its population fleeing to the nearby island of Salamis. The Persians burned the city, destroying temples and houses, exacting revenge for the burning of Sardis a generation earlier. But the war was not over. The Greek fleet, outnumbered but fighting in the narrow waters between Salamis and the mainland, managed to defeat the Persian navy in a chaotic battle that left hundreds of ships destroyed or captured. Xerxes, watching from a throne set up on a hillside overlooking the strait, saw his fleet shattered. Without naval superiority, his supply lines were vulnerable. He withdrew the bulk of his army back to Asia, leaving a force under the general Mardonius to winter in Greece and continue the campaign the following year. In 479 BC, at Plataea, the Greek coalition defeated Mardonius, and on the same day, or so the Greeks later claimed, a Greek fleet destroyed the remaining Persian ships at Mycale on the Ionian coast. The invasion was over. Greece remained independent. Xerxes returned to Persia, his ambitions in Europe thwarted. The failure in Greece did not end the Persian Empire, did not even significantly weaken it. For the Greeks, and later for European historians, the Persian Wars became a defining moment, a triumph of freedom over despotism, of West over East. But from a Persian perspective, Greece was a minor frontier, a failed campaign on the periphery of an empire that continued to thrive for another 150 years. Egypt was more important, Babylon more central, the eastern provinces more lucrative. Xerxes would rule for another 14 years, focusing on construction projects, completing his father's work at Persepolis, building new palaces at Susa, and on maintaining internal stability. He was assassinated in 465 BC, killed in a palace conspiracy led by the commander of his bodyguard. His son Artaxerxes the Spurious succeeded him, and the empire entered a new phase, one marked less by external conquest than by internal intrigue and the gradual loosening of central control. The decades following Xerxes saw a parade of kings: Artaxerxes I, who ruled for 40 years; Darius II, whose reign was marked by rebellions and court conspiracies; Artaxerxes II, who faced a civil war when his younger brother Cyrus attempted to seize the throne. This Cyrus, known as Cyrus the Younger, to distinguish him from the founder, gathered an army of Persian loyalists and Greek mercenaries, marching inland from his base in Asia Minor toward Babylon. The two armies met at Cunaxa in 401 BC. Cyrus was killed in the fighting, and his cause collapsed. The Greek mercenaries, suddenly stranded in the middle of the Persian Empire, with no employer and no clear path home, began the famous march recounted in Xenophon's Anabasis, fighting their way north to the Black Sea coast and eventually back to Greece. The episode demonstrated both the continuing wealth of the empire. Cyrus had been able to hire 10,000 Greek soldiers, equip them, and pay them, and its growing internal divisions, the willingness of satraps and princes to challenge the king, to use the empire's resources in their own struggles for power. Yet for all these troubles, the empire endured. The administrative system, established by Darius, continued to function. Tax revenues still flowed to the imperial treasuries. Construction projects still proceeded at the major palace sites. Armies still mustered when needed. The problems were real, but not yet fatal. Satraps might rebel, but they were usually brought back into line through a combination of military force and negotiation. Egypt might revolt periodically, regaining independence for a few decades before being reconquered. Greek city-states might fight among themselves and occasionally against Persian forces, but they never united long enough to pose a serious threat to the empire as a whole. Persia remained the dominant power in the Near East, its kings still styling themselves King of Kings, King of Persia, King of Countries, still receiving tribute from peoples across a vast territory. Persepolis in these years continued to function as a ceremonial center, the place where the empire's diversity and unity were displayed and celebrated. Each spring during the festival of Nowruz, New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox, delegations from across the empire gathered at the palace complex. They processed through the great gates, ascended the monumental staircases, and presented themselves and their tribute to the king in the Apadana. The gifts they brought represented the wealth and specialties of their regions: horses from Media, gold from Lydia, textiles from Babylon, spices from the east. This was more than simple taxation. It was a ritual reaffirmation of the relationship between center and periphery, between king and subject peoples. By bringing their gifts to Persepolis, the delegates acknowledged the king's authority. By receiving them graciously, by redistributing some of that wealth in the form of feasts and gifts to loyal nobles and officials, the king demonstrated his power and generosity, the two qualities that legitimized his rule. The reliefs carved on the staircases depict this ritual in perpetual motion. Delegation after delegation, carved with exquisite attention to detail, each group distinguished by their clothing, their hairstyles, the gifts they carry. The Medes in their rounded caps and flowing robes, the Armenians leading fine horses, their breed still valued today, the Parthians from the northeastern frontier, the Sogdians from beyond the Oxus River, the Bactrians with their distinctive two-humped camels, Egyptians carrying tribute from the Nile, Ethiopians with tusks of ivory, Indians with jars of gold dust, Arabs with their single-humped camels, and people from the Ionian coast, Greeks in tunics bringing cloth and weapons. The procession is orderly, dignified, each figure walking forward with measured steps, approaching the king who sits on his throne at the center of the empire, the still point around which all this diversity revolves. The architecture of Persepolis itself embodies this imperial ideology. The columns of the Apadana are tall and slender, their capitals shaped like bulls or griffins, mythical creatures that combine elements of different animals and thus symbolize the unity of diverse elements. The walls were once covered with glazed bricks, painted in bright colors, blues and yellows and greens that would have shimmered in the sunlight. The Great Gate of Xerxes, through which visitors entered the platform, was flanked by enormous winged bulls with human heads, lamassu borrowed from Mesopotamian tradition, but rendered in the Persian style. Inside the complex, reliefs show the king in various poses, receiving delegations, sitting in judgment, hunting lions, ascending to a throne. Always the king is larger than those around him, a visual reminder of his superiority. And always somewhere in the composition, the figure of Ahura Mazda appears, the supreme god of the Zoroastrian religion, represented as a winged disc, or as a bearded figure emerging from a ring, hovering above the king, and bestowing divine approval on his rule. Zoroastrianism, the religion associated with the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster in Greek, had become increasingly important to the Persian kings. The religion taught that the world was a battleground between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord and god of truth and light, and Angra the destructive spirit associated with lies and darkness. Humans were required to choose sides in this cosmic struggle through their thoughts, words, and deeds. The religion emphasized ethical behavior, truthfulness, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. While the Achaemenid kings supported Zoroastrianism and used its imagery in their official art, they also continued to patronize other religions throughout the empire, supporting the worship of Babylonian gods, Egyptian deities, Greek cults. This religious tolerance was not simply enlightened policy. It was a practical necessity in an empire where different peoples worshipped different gods and where attempting to impose religious uniformity would have provoked endless revolts. Yet beneath the surface stability, beneath the continuing rituals and the architectural grandeur, the empire was changing. The 4th century BC saw a gradual shift in the balance of power between center and periphery. Satraps grew increasingly independent, maintaining their own armies, conducting their own diplomatic relations with Greek city-states and other powers. The Great Satraps Revolt of the 360 BC saw multiple western provinces rise up simultaneously, and though the rebellion was eventually suppressed, it took years and revealed the limits of royal authority. Egypt, which had regained independence in 404 BC, remained beyond Persian control for 60 years, and repeated attempts at reconquest failed. The costs of maintaining the empire were rising while tax revenues from some regions declined. More and more, the kings relied on Greek mercenaries to supplement or replace Persian troops, a sign of weakness that astute observers noted. Artaxerxes III, who came to the throne in 358 BC, after murdering most of his relatives to eliminate potential rivals, managed to reassert Persian power through a combination of ruthlessness and military skill. He successfully reconquered Egypt in 343 BC, crushing the native dynasties that had ruled there for 6 decades and reimposing Persian control. He suppressed revolts in Phoenicia and Cyprus, restored some measure of discipline to the satrapal administrations, and rebuilt the royal treasuries through increased taxation and the confiscation of temple wealth. But his methods, brutal reprisals, mass executions, the destruction of cities that resisted, alienated many of his subjects and created a climate of fear and resentment. In 338 BC, he was poisoned by his vizier Bagoas, a eunuch who had risen to become one of the most powerful figures at court. Bagoas then placed Artaxerxes' youngest son Arses on the throne, and when Arses attempted to assert his independence, Bagoas poisoned him too. The throne passed to a distant relative, Darius III, in 336 BC. He would be the last Achaemenid king. Darius III inherited an empire that was still vast and wealthy, but increasingly vulnerable. The satrapies were difficult to control. The Greek city-states were as troublesome as ever, and Egypt was seething with resentment at its recent reconquest. And to the northwest in Macedonia, a new power was rising. Philip II had unified the fractious kingdoms and city-states of Greece under Macedonian hegemony, creating a professional army that combined the discipline of hoplite warfare with new tactics and technology. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated, and his 20-year-old son Alexander inherited the throne and his father's ambitions. Within 2 years, Alexander had secured his position in Macedonia and Greece. In 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont with an army of about 35,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. The invasion that would topple the Persian Empire had begun. The Persian response was disjointed. The satraps of the western provinces gathered their forces and met Alexander at the Granicus River in northwestern Asia Minor. It was a hard-fought battle, but Alexander's tactical genius and the superior training of his Macedonian phalanx won the day. The Persians fell back, and Alexander marched south along the Aegean coast, liberating or conquering, depending on one's perspective, the Greek cities of Ionia. Darius III, recognizing the threat, began assembling a massive army in Mesopotamia. The two forces met in 333 BC at Issus, near the northeastern corner of the Mediterranean. Again, despite superior numbers, the Persians were defeated. Darius fled the battlefield, abandoning his family, his mother, wife, and children, who were captured by Alexander. The Macedonian king treated them with courtesy, a gesture calculated to demonstrate his magnanimity and win over Persian opinion. Alexander did not immediately pursue Darius. Instead, he turned south, conquering the Phoenician cities and then Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule and crowned pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria at the Nile Delta, the first and most successful of the many cities he would name after himself. Then, in 331 BC, he marched east into Mesopotamia, where Darius had assembled an even larger army, perhaps 100,000 strong, on the plains of Gaugamela, near Arbela. The battle was the largest and most decisive of the war. Darius commanded from the center, surrounded by his best troops, the elite Persian cavalry and infantry. Alexander, commanding from his position on the Macedonian right wing, saw a gap in the Persian lines and charged, leading his companion cavalry directly toward Darius. The Persian king, seeing the Macedonian horsemen bearing down on him, panicked and fled. With their king gone, the Persian army disintegrated. Thousands were killed in the rout, thousands more were captured. Darius retreated eastward, hoping to regroup and rally support from the eastern satrapies. But his support was crumbling. Alexander occupied Babylon without resistance, then moved on to Susa and Persepolis. At Persepolis, after seizing the enormous wealth stored in the royal treasury, gold and silver accumulated over 2 centuries of imperial rule. Alexander allowed or ordered his troops to burn the palace complex. Ancient sources differ on whether this was a deliberate act of revenge for the burning of Athens 150 years earlier, or a drunken accident during a night of celebration. Either way, the great ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire went up in flames. The wooden roofs and timbers burned fiercely, the heat cracking the stone columns and causing some to topple. The glazed bricks of the walls melted and fused together. When the fires finally burned out, Persepolis was a ruin, its halls open to the sky, its relief scorched and blackened. Darius fled farther east, pursued by Alexander. In 330 BC, somewhere in the mountains of northeastern Iran, Darius was murdered by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, who declared himself the new king. Alexander captured and executed Bessus, then continued his campaign into Central Asia, and eventually into India, conquering lands that had barely been part of the Persian Empire, pushing far beyond the frontiers Darius the Great had established. But with Darius III's death, the Achaemenid dynasty had ended. The empire that Cyrus the Great had founded 220 years earlier, that had stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, that had ruled more people and territory than any previous state in history, was no more. Yet, in another sense, the Persian Empire did not end with Alexander's conquest. The administrative structures the Achaemenids had created, the satrapy system, the road network, the practice of ruling through local elites, were largely adopted by Alexander and his successors. When Alexander died in 323 BC, and his generals divided his conquests among themselves, the territories that had been the Persian heartland fell to Seleucus, who founded a dynasty that would rule much of the former empire for nearly 2 centuries. The Seleucids adopted Persian court ceremonies, minted coins showing themselves in Persian dress, and continued to present themselves as the successors of the Achaemenids. Later still, when the Parthians and then the Sasanians rose to power in Iran, they too would look back to the Achaemenid period as a golden age, claiming to restore the glory of ancient Persia. The physical remains of the empire tell their own story. Persepolis, despite the burning, was never completely destroyed. Parts of it continued to be used for centuries, and the site was never entirely forgotten. Medieval Islamic geographers knew it as Takhti Jamshid, the throne of Jamshid, associating it with a legendary king from Persian mythology. In the 19th century, European travelers and scholars began to study the ruins systematically, copying inscriptions, making drawings of the reliefs, excavating parts of the site. In the 20th century, archaeological work intensified, revealing more about the construction techniques, the layout of the complex, the daily life of those who worked there. Today, Persepolis is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of Iran's most important tourist attractions and a potent symbol of national identity. To visit Persepolis now is to confront layers of meaning and memory. For Iranians, the site represents a time when their ancestors ruled an empire that was, by the standards of its day, remarkably tolerant and sophisticated, that valued learning and art, that connected distant peoples and cultures. The Achaemenids are a source of pride, especially in contrast to later stereotypes of Oriental despotism promulgated by Greek and later European writers. The fact that Cyrus the Great is mentioned favorably in the Hebrew Bible, he is the king who allowed the Jews to return from Babylonian exile and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, adds to his positive reputation. For outsiders, Persepolis offers a glimpse into a vanished world, a chance to see the monuments of a civilization that shaped the course of ancient history, but that is less familiar to Western audiences than Egypt or Greece or Rome. The site itself is hauntingly beautiful. The columns that still stand rise like stone trees against the sky. The reliefs, weathered by centuries of wind and sun, retain their essential forms, the processions of delegates, the royal audiences, the mythical creatures. Behind the ruins, the Ku'e-Ramat, the Mountain of Mercy, rises steeply, its rocky face honeycombed with the tombs of later Persian kings cut into the cliff. In spring, when wildflowers bloom on the plain, when the light is soft and the air is clear, Persepolis seems almost to come alive, as if the weight of all those who passed through its gates, kings and courtiers, craftsmen and soldiers, delegates from distant lands bringing tribute, might somehow still be present, still echoing in the stones. The legacy of the Persian Empire extends far beyond Iran, far beyond the physical ruins, scattered across the Middle East and Central Asia. The Achaemenids demonstrated that it was possible to create a stable, functioning state across vast distances and among diverse peoples. They showed that empire did not have to mean cultural uniformity, that conquered peoples could retain their languages and religions and customs, while still being integrated into a larger political and economic system. This model would be adopted, with variations, by later empires. The Macedonians and their Hellenistic successors, the Romans, the various Islamic caliphates, even modern colonial empires. The idea that a single state could encompass multiple nations, that diversity could be a source of strength rather than weakness, that tolerance, even if motivated by pragmatism rather than principle, could serve as the foundation of political order. These ideas, worked out in practice by the Achaemenid kings and their administrators, have echoes that persist to this day. The Persians also left more tangible legacies. The road systems they built continued to be used for centuries, facilitating trade and communication long after the empire fell. The practice of using Aramaic as a lingua franca across the Near East, adopted by the Persian administration, ensured that this language remained important for centuries, eventually evolving into various dialects used by Jewish, Christian, and other communities. Persian artistic motifs, the winged bulls, the stylized floral designs, the images of royal power, influenced the art of successor cultures, appearing in Hellenistic, Parthian, and Sasanian works. Even the concept of kingship, embodied by the Achaemenids, the king of kings who stood above all other rulers, who mediated between the human and divine realms, who bore responsibility for the welfare of vast numbers of people, left its mark on how later cultures imagined imperial power. In the ruins of Susa, another of the great Achaemenid cities, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of palaces and administrative buildings, inscriptions in multiple languages, artifacts that speak of daily life in the Persian Empire. Susa, far older than Persepolis, had been an important city for millennia before the Persians made it one of their capitals. It sits on the edge of the Mesopotamian plain, at the point where the rivers descending from the Zagros Mountains spread out into the flatlands. The site has been occupied almost continuously from the 5th millennium BC into the Islamic period and beyond, layer upon layer of human settlement piled atop one another, each generation building on the ruins of the last. To excavate Susa is to dig through thousands of years of history, to find Elamite temples beneath Persian palaces, Parthian structures overlying Seleucid remains, Islamic buildings incorporating stones robbed from ancient monuments. At Ecbatana, the ancient Median capital that Cyrus and his successors continued to use as a summer residence, the situation is even more complicated. The modern city of Hamadan sprawls over the ancient site, making systematic archaeology nearly impossible. Excavations in various parts of the city have revealed fragments of Achaemenid construction, massive stone walls, column bases, inscriptions, but the full extent and layout of the ancient city remain unknown. Yet, Ecbatana's position in the mountains, its elevation that makes it cooler than the lowland cities, explains why the Persian kings favored it as a retreat from the summer heat of the plains. The Persian court was itinerant by necessity, moving between different capitals according to the season, and this pattern of movement both reflected and reinforced the decentralized nature of imperial administration. The tomb of Cyrus at Pasargadae still receives visitors, pilgrims of a sort, who come to pay their respects to the founder of the empire. Iranian schoolchildren on field trips, historians and archaeologists, occasional tourists, all make their way across the plain to stand before the simple stepped monument. The chamber itself is empty, the sarcophagus and any treasures were looted long ago, but the structure endures, built so solidly that earthquakes and centuries of weather have failed to bring it down. In its simplicity, in its deliberate restraint, the tomb speaks to something essential about Cyrus, as he was remembered not a god, not even a builder of monumental splendor in the Egyptian style, but a man who accomplished great things and who asked only to be remembered. In later centuries, poets and historians would debate Cyrus's character and legacy. Was he a liberator? Or a conqueror? A wise and just ruler? Or merely a successful warlord? The truth, as always, is complicated. Cyrus built an empire through force, through military campaigns that killed thousands and displaced populations. The liberation he offered conquered peoples was the freedom to worship their own gods and follow their own customs, but only under Persian rule, only as subjects of his empire. Yet by the standards of his time, this was not nothing. The Assyrians had been brutal in their conquest and oppression, deporting entire populations, destroying temples, imposing their will through terror. The Babylonians, the Egyptians, the other great powers of the ancient Near East, had all operated on the principle that might made right. That conquest gave the victor the right to dispose of the conquered, as they saw fit. Cyrus and his successors offered something different. Conquest followed by accommodation, the integration of conquered peoples into a larger system that allowed them some measure of autonomy, some continuity with their past. The Greek historians, for all their bias and occasional misunderstanding, recognized this. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, depicted the Persians with a mixture of admiration and criticism, seeing them as worthy adversaries whose customs, though strange, were understandable as products of their history and environment. Xenophon, in his semi-fictional biography of Cyrus, portrayed him as an ideal ruler, wise and just, a model for Greek princes to emulate. Later, when Alexander conquered the empire, he adopted many Persian practices, wearing Persian dress on formal occasions, appointing Persians to high positions in his administration, marrying Persian noblewomen, and encouraging his officers to do the same. This was not simple cultural appropriation. It was a recognition that the Persian system worked, that the Achaemenids had solved problems of governance and administration that no purely Greek approach could have handled. The Behistun inscription, carved high on its cliff face, has weathered the centuries well. The rock is hard, the location relatively protected from the elements. For over 2 millennia, travelers passing along the road below could look up and see the relief and the columns of text, though few could read them. The old Persian cuneiform script had been forgotten. The Elamite and Babylonian languages were no longer spoken. In the 19th century, a British army officer named Henry Rawlinson risked his life to copy the inscription, climbing the cliff face and making careful drawings of the characters. His work, along with that of other scholars, eventually led to the decipherment of Old Persian cuneiform, opening up a whole new field of ancient Near Eastern studies. The Behistun inscription became a key to understanding not just the reign of Darius, but the entire Achaemenid period, providing names and dates and details that could be cross-referenced with Greek sources and archaeological finds. The inscription is propaganda, certainly. It presents Darius's version of events, justifies his seizure of power, emphasizes his legitimacy and the illegitimacy of his opponents. But it also reveals much about how the Achaemenid kings understood their role. Darius presents himself as the chosen of Ahura Mazda, the upholder of truth against the lie, the defender of order against chaos. The rebellions he suppressed are depicted not as legitimate challenges to his authority, but as criminal uprisings led by deceivers. The message is clear. Resistance to the king is not just politically unwise, but morally wrong, a violation of the cosmic order. This ideology of kingship, this conflation of political power with religious and moral authority, was not unique to Persia. Most ancient rulers claimed divine sanction in one form or another, but the Achaemenids articulated it with unusual clarity and force. In the eastern provinces of the empire, in the lands that are now Afghanistan and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, the Persian presence has left fewer visible traces. These were frontier regions, difficult to control, populated by semi-nomadic peoples who resisted incorporation into any centralized state. Yet Persian influence extended even here. Bactria, with its capital at Balkh, became an important satrapy, a staging ground for campaigns into India, and a barrier against the nomadic peoples of the steppe. Sogdiana, beyond the Oxus River, was brought under Persian control, though revolts were common, and the region required constant military presence. These eastern satrapies provided soldiers. Bactrian cavalry was highly valued, and controlled important sections of the trade routes that would later be known as the Silk Road. The diversity of the Persian Empire is staggering when one considers it in full. From the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Armenia, from the Aegean coast to the Indus Valley, from the steppes of Central Asia to the Persian Gulf, the empire encompassed an extraordinary range of environments, peoples, languages, religions, and cultures. Egyptians and Babylonians, Greeks and Jews, Persians and Medes, Arabs and Indians, Armenians and Scythians, all were subjects of the King of Kings, all paid tribute, all contributed to the empire's wealth and diversity. Administering such a realm required not just military power, but also flexibility, cultural sensitivity, and organizational genius. The fact that the Achaemenids managed to hold this diverse empire together for over 2 centuries is a testament to the effectiveness of their system. Yet the system had inherent weaknesses. The satraps, despite oversight mechanisms, had considerable power and could always choose to rebel if they thought they could get away with it. The empire's vast size made communication and transportation difficult, even with the royal road and other infrastructure improvements. Different regions had different strategic importance and different levels of integration into the imperial economy, leading to disparities in treatment and investment. The reliance on local elites for day-to-day administration meant that imperial control was often shallow, but in many areas, the Persians ruled through intermediaries rather than directly. And the succession system, which followed no clear rules and often led to bloody contests between potential heirs, introduced an element of instability at the very heart of the empire. These weaknesses became more pronounced over time. The later Achaemenid kings faced challenges their predecessors had not: increasingly independent satraps, a treasury strained by the costs of maintaining a large empire, the persistent problem of Egypt, which rebelled multiple times, and the growing power of Macedonia under Philip and Alexander. By the time Darius III came to the throne, the empire was still immensely wealthy and powerful by any objective measure, but it was also vulnerable in ways that a younger, more dynamic state like Macedonia could exploit. Alexander's conquest was not inevitable. Had Darius III been a more capable general, had the Persian forces been better led at Granicus and Issus and Gaugamela, the outcome might have been different. But once the Macedonians gained momentum, once they had demonstrated that Persian armies could be defeated in open battle, the empire's internal divisions became fatal. The burning of Persepolis marked the symbolic end of Achaemenid power, but it did not erase the memory of what the Persians had built. For the peoples of Iran, the Achaemenid period remained a source of pride and inspiration through the centuries of Hellenistic, Parthian, and Sasanian rule, through the Islamic conquests, and into the modern era. The Sasanians, who ruled Iran from the 3rd to the 7th centuries AD, consciously styled themselves as the restorers of ancient Persian glory, claiming continuity with the Achaemenids even though centuries separated them. They built their own monumental palaces, carved their own rock reliefs showing kings receiving tribute and defeating enemies, and propagated their own version of Zoroastrianism. When Islamic armies conquered Iran in the 7th century, they too were influenced by Persian culture, and many Persian administrative practices and cultural traditions were preserved and integrated into the Islamic world. In modern times, the rediscovery of the Achaemenid past became intertwined with Iranian nationalism. The Pahlavi dynasty, which ruled Iran from 1925 to 1979, emphasized pre-Islamic Persian heritage as a source of national identity, staging elaborate celebrations at Persepolis to commemorate the 2500th anniversary of the founding of the Persian Empire. These celebrations were controversial, they were expensive, they seemed to privilege ancient Persian identity over Islamic tradition, and they were staged primarily for international audiences, but they reflected a genuine pride in the Achaemenid achievement. After the Islamic Revolution, the relationship between modern Iran and its pre-Islamic past became more complex, but the Achaemenids have remained a source of national pride, a reminder that Iranian civilization is ancient, sophisticated, and has left a lasting mark on world history. The ruins of Persepolis, standing on their platform beneath the mountains, continue to draw visitors who come to marvel at what remains and to imagine what has been lost. The columns that still stand, the staircases with their endless processions of tribute bearers, the gateways flanked by guardian figures, all speak of a time when this was the ceremonial heart of the largest empire the world had yet seen. The reliefs, though weathered by time, retain their essential message. This was a place where the power and diversity of the empire were made visible, where representatives of all the subject peoples came to acknowledge their king and receive his blessing, where the order and stability that Persian rule brought to a fractious world were celebrated and renewed. To stand in the Apadana, to look up at the columns rising against the sky, to walk among the carved figures frozen in their eternal procession, is to feel the presence of history in a direct and immediate way. These stones were quarried and shaped and set in place by human hands, by laborers and craftsmen whose names we do not know, working under the direction of architects and overseers, fulfilling the vision of kings who believed they ruled by divine right. The figures carved in the reliefs were based on real people, on actual delegations that came to Persepolis year after year, bringing the wealth of their regions to the imperial center. The system they represented, tribute and reciprocity, conquest and accommodation, centralized power and local autonomy, was real, functioning for over 2 centuries, enabling trade and communication across vast distances, maintaining a degree of peace and stability that would not be seen again in the region until the rise of later empires. The wind that moves across the plain of Mavdasht, that stirs the wildflowers growing among the ruins, is the same wind that blew here when Persepolis was intact, when its halls were roofed and its walls painted, when the New Year celebrations brought crowds to witness the ritual affirmation of royal power. The mountains that rise behind the site, the Ku'a Rafmat, with its royal tombs, have not changed. The sky is the same sky, the light falls at the same angle, the seasons turn in the same ancient rhythm. What has changed is human. The empire has fallen, the palaces have burned, the languages once spoken here are dead or transformed. But the stones remain, and with them the memory of what was accomplished here, the attempt to create order out of chaos, to unite diverse peoples under a single authority, to build something that would last. In this sense, the ruins of Persepolis are not simply a memorial to a vanished empire, but a meditation on the nature of power and its limits, on human ambition and the passage of time. Empires rise and fall, civilizations flourish and fade. Even the mightiest works of human hands eventually crumble and return to dust. Yet the attempt matters, the effort to build, to organize, to create something larger than oneself. The Achaemenids, for all their flaws and limitations, for all the violence inherent in their conquests, and the exploitation built into their imperial system, did manage to create something remarkable. They showed that it was possible to govern a vast, diverse empire without resorting to constant terror, that conquered peoples could be integrated, rather than simply subjugated, that tolerance and accommodation could serve as tools of statecraft. These are lessons that later empires would learn, forget, and have to relearn, over and over again, through history. The Persian Empire, that rose in the 6th century BC, and fell to Alexander in the 4th, left behind more than ruins and inscriptions. It left a model of how large-scale political organization could work, how diverse peoples could be brought together under a single system, how administration and culture could be separated so that conquered peoples could retain their identity while still being part of the empire. It demonstrated that infrastructure, roads, postal systems, standardized coinage, could bind an empire together more effectively than armies alone. It showed that religious tolerance, even when practiced for pragmatic rather than idealistic reasons, could create stability in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state. And it proved that the combination of military power, administrative skill, and cultural flexibility could create an empire that endured for centuries. The sun sets behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the plain of Persepolis. The columns glow golden in the late afternoon light. The reliefs stand in sharp contrast between light and shadow, and the whole site seems to take on a kind of luminous quality, as if the stones themselves were remembering the glory that once was. Visitors begin to leave, walking back toward the parking areas and the modern facilities at the edge of the archaeological zone. The site will close for the night, the gates will be locked, and the ruins will be left to the darkness and the wind. But in the morning, when the sun rises again over the mountains, when the first light touches the columns and brings the reliefs back into visibility, Persepolis will still be here, still standing, still speaking across the millennia of what humans can accomplish when they dare to dream on an imperial scale. The story of the Persian Empire is a story of ambition realized and ultimately lost, of power that seemed unassailable yet proved mortal, of monuments built to last forever, that now stand as ruins. It is a story that has been told and retold for over 2 millennia, by Greeks and Persians, by Romans and Arabs, by medieval chroniclers and modern historians. Each telling reflects the concerns and perspectives of its own time, each generation finding in the Persian past what it needs: a warning about the dangers of hubris, a model of effective administration, a symbol of cultural achievement, a reminder of human transience. The actual Persians, the people who lived and worked and died in the empire's service, who built the roads and palaces, who fought the battles and governed the provinces, who brought tribute to Persepolis and worshipped in the empire's many temples, remain mostly anonymous, their individual stories lost. What survives is the collective achievement, the empire itself as a historical phenomenon, and the ruins that mark its passage. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it is enough that we can still walk among the columns at Persepolis, still read the inscriptions at Behistun, still trace the routes of the royal road, and imagine the messengers racing along it with news for the king. Perhaps it is enough that we can study the Achaemenid administrative system and see in it the prototype for later empires, can examine the art and architecture and see the blending of multiple cultural traditions, can read the ancient sources, both Persian and Greek, and reconstruct something of what this empire was and what it meant to those who lived within it. The Persian Empire is long gone, but it is not forgotten, and in its ruins and its legacy, it continues to speak to us about the possibilities and limits of human organization, about the creation and dissolution of political order, about the enduring human desire to build something that will outlast individual lives, and achieve a kind of immortality through collective accomplishment. The Iranian plateau stretches away into the distance, its mountains fading into blue haze on the horizon, its valleys hidden in shadow, its deserts shimmering in the heat. Somewhere out there are other ruins, other sites associated with the Achaemenids, some excavated, some still buried, some so thoroughly destroyed that they exist now only in ancient texts and the conjectures of scholars. The empire was vast, and its traces are scattered across thousands of miles and multiple modern nations. To understand it fully would require a lifetime of study, multiple journeys to distant sites, fluency in ancient languages, and an ability to integrate archaeological, textual, and artistic evidence into a coherent whole. No single person can do all this, which is why the study of the Achaemenid Empire is a collective endeavor, built up over decades by many scholars working in different fields, each contributing pieces to the larger puzzle. But even without complete understanding, even with all the gaps in our knowledge and the debates about interpretation, the broad outlines are clear. In the 6th century BC, a people from the highlands of southern Iran, building on the achievements of earlier civilizations and taking advantage of particular historical circumstances, created an empire of unprecedented size and sophistication. They developed administrative systems and infrastructure that enabled them to govern effectively across vast distances. They adopted a policy of religious and cultural tolerance that helped stabilize their conquests. They built cities and monuments that impressed contemporaries and continue to impress us. And they maintained their empire for over 2 centuries, longer than many later empires that learned from their example. When their empire finally fell, it fell not from internal decay, but from conquest by an external enemy, and even then, much of what they had built survived to be incorporated into the empires that followed. This is the story of the Persian Empire, of its rise from obscurity to world dominance, of the kings who built it and the peoples who populated it, of the monuments they raised and the systems they created. It is a story set in landscapes that range from snow-capped mountains to burning deserts, from fertile river valleys to windswept plains. It is a story told in multiple languages, Old Persian and Elamite, and Akkadian, Greek and Hebrew, and Aramaic, each providing a different perspective on the same events. It is a story that has echoed down through the centuries, influencing how later empires were built and how historians have understood the dynamics of large-scale political organization. And it is a story that continues to resonate today, in a world still grappling with questions of how diverse peoples can live together, how power can be exercised without tyranny, how empires rise and why they fall. The light fades from the ruins at Persepolis. The columns fade from gold to grey to shadow. Stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars that shone down on Cyrus and Darius, on Xerxes and Artaxerxes, on all the kings of Persia and all their subjects, on the soldiers and merchants and craftsmen who made the empire function, on the delegations that came year after year to pay tribute and renew their oaths of loyalty. The ruins stand silent in the darkness, stone witnesses to what was and what can never be again, monuments to human ambition and the passage of time, to the building of empires and their inevitable fall, to the enduring presence of the past in the landscape of the present. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought in October 331 BC, was the largest and most decisive confrontation between Persia and Macedon. Darius's army may have numbered 100,000 or more, including scythed chariots, war elephants and cavalry from across the empire. Alexander had perhaps 47,000 men. The battle began at dawn, with the Persian cavalry attempting to envelop the Macedonian flanks. The scythed chariots charged but were neutralized by Macedonian light infantry, who opened their ranks to let the chariots through, then killed the drivers. The crucial moment came when Alexander spotted a gap in the Persian line. Leading the companion cavalry, he charged directly at this weakness, aiming once again for Darius himself. The Persian center buckled. Darius, seeing Alexander's wedge of cavalry bearing down on him, seeing his bodyguard being cut down, made the same decision he had made at Issus. This time, the consequences were final. The Persian army collapsed completely. Some units continued to fight, but without coordination or leadership, thousands were slaughtered in the pursuit. Darius fled east, toward the satrapies of Iran proper, hoping to raise another army, but his credibility was gone. He had fled twice from battle. The great king who could not stand and fight had lost the mandate of heaven. Alexander advanced to Babylon, which opened its gates without resistance. He was welcomed as a liberator, much as Cyrus had been welcomed centuries before. From Babylon he marched to Susa, where the royal treasury surrendered peacefully. The wealth accumulated over 2 centuries of empire, 50,000 talents of gold and silver, according to ancient sources, fell into Macedonian hands. It was enough to fund Alexander's campaigns for years and to transform the economy of the entire Greek world. Then Alexander turned toward Persepolis, the city that Darius the Great had built, the ceremonial capital of the empire. The symbol of Persian power and majesty lay ahead. The Persian gates, a narrow pass through the mountains, was defended by Persian forces, but Alexander found an alternative route and outflanked them. In January 330 BC, he entered Persepolis. What happened next has been debated for over 2 millennia. Alexander allowed his soldiers to plunder the city, a rare permission that resulted in widespread looting and violence. Then, several months later, the palace complex, the Apadana, the Hall of 100 Columns, the royal residences, was burned. Ancient sources offer different explanations. Some say it was deliberate revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens, a symbolic end to the Persian Empire. Others claim it was an accident, the result of a drunken revel that got out of hand. Some suggest it was encouraged by a Greek courtesan named Thais, who urged Alexander to let the Greeks have their vengeance. Modern archaeology shows that the fire was catastrophic. The heat was so intense that stone cracked and melted. The cedar beams and wooden roofs burned completely. But the destruction was not total. Some areas of the complex were spared, suggesting perhaps that the burning was controlled, deliberate. Whatever the truth, the symbolism was clear. The heart of the Persian Empire had been consumed by fire. The age of the Achaemenids was ending in smoke and flame. Darius III fled deeper into the east, into Bactria, one of the empire's most remote provinces. Alexander pursued him relentlessly. But before Alexander could catch him, Darius was betrayed by his own men. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, and other nobles, seeing no future in continued loyalty to a discredited king, murdered Darius and took his royal regalia, attempting to set themselves up as successors. Alexander found Darius's body by the side of the road, abandoned by his murderers. According to the sources, Alexander covered the dead king with his own cloak and sent the body back to Persepolis for burial with royal honors. It was a gesture that combined respect, propaganda, and practicality. Alexander presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate successor to the Achaemenids, avenging the murdered king and restoring order to the empire. The death of Darius III in 330 BC marked the formal end of the Persian Empire. Alexander would spend 3 more years conquering the eastern provinces, pursuing Bessus and other rebels, extending his control to the borders of India. He would adopt Persian dress and customs, marry Persian noblewomen, attempt to fuse Macedonian and Persian elites into a single ruling class. But the empire, as the Achaemenids had known it, was gone. The burning of Persepolis stands as one of history's most evocative moments. The greatest palace complex in the world, built over a century by 3 generations of kings, adorned with the finest art and craftsmanship of the age, reduced to charred ruins in a single night. The relief sculptures survived, protected by the rubble that covered them. The columns, though many fell, were stone and could not burn. But the glory was gone, the power extinguished, the dynasty ended. Walking through Persepolis today, the evidence of the fire is still visible. Blackened stone, cracked by heat, areas where the intense temperatures caused the rock itself to change color. The ruins are beautiful in their own way, romantic even, but they speak of loss, of ending, of the fragility of human achievement. The empire that seemed eternal lasted just over 2 centuries. The capital that was meant to stand forever burned in a night. Alexander would die 7 years later in Babylon, at the age of 32, his empire immediately fragmenting among his generals. The Persian Empire would never be reconstituted in its original form. The Seleucid dynasty, one of the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's conquests, would rule much of the old Persian territory, but it was a different kind of state, Greek in culture and administration, though ruling over Iranian peoples. Later, the Parthians and then the Sasanians would claim the legacy of the Achaemenids, but they too were different, new empires for new ages. The end came not through internal collapse, not through gradual decay, but through conquest, swift, brutal, and decisive. In little more than a decade, everything the Persians had built was swept away. The roads still ran, the satrapies still existed, the peoples were still there, but the ruling dynasty was gone, the imperial ideology shattered, the capital reduced to ruins. It was an ending that came with shocking speed, a reminder that even the mightiest empires are not immortal, that power is always temporary, that glory fades. The last Achaemenid king died ignominiously, murdered by his own men, abandoned on a dusty road far from the splendors of his capitals. The empire he inherited had been in decline. but it had still been vast, wealthy, and seemingly strong. That it fell so quickly speaks to both Alexander's genius and to the structural weaknesses that had accumulated over decades of mismanagement and internal strife. But even in defeat, even in the ashes of Persepolis, the Persian Empire left its mark on the world. The ideas it pioneered, the systems it created, the vision of empire it embodied, all would survive, transformed but recognizable, in the empires that followed. The Persian Empire fell in 330 BC, but its legacy did not die with Darius III, or burn with Persepolis. What the Achaemenids created, the idea of a vast multicultural empire, held together by tolerance, efficient administration and infrastructure, would echo through the centuries, influencing rulers and states long after the last Persian king was buried. The most immediate inheritors were the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from the breakup of Alexander's empire. The Seleucids, who ruled over much of the old Persian territory in Western Asia, adopted many Persian administrative practices. They maintained the satrapy system, collected tribute in similar ways, used the royal road network, and even minted coins modeled on the Persian daric. The Ptolemies in Egypt likewise continued many Achaemenid practices, presenting themselves as pharaohs in the Persian manner, as legitimate successors to earlier rulers, rather than as foreign conquerors. The model of governance was perhaps the most enduring legacy. The Persian approach, allowing subject peoples to maintain their languages, religions, and customs, while paying tribute and acknowledging royal authority, became the template for managing large, diverse empires. The Romans, though they developed their own distinctive administrative style, were influenced by Persian precedents that had filtered through the Hellenistic kingdoms. The concept of provinces governed by appointed officials who wielded broad authority but were checked by other officials and royal inspectors became standard imperial practice. The Consivantatemperial practice, the road networks the Persians built, continued to function for centuries. The Royal Road, that marvel of Achaemenid engineering stretching from Sardis to Susa, remained an important route well into the Roman period. The principle of maintaining secure, well-supplied roads with rest stations to facilitate communication and trade became fundamental to imperial administration everywhere. Rome's famous road system owed much to Persian precedent, even if Roman engineering techniques were more advanced. The standardization of coinage, pioneered by the Lydians, but systematized by the Persians, transformed the ancient economy. The daric and siglas became international currencies, trusted throughout the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds. Later empires would follow this model, understanding that a stable currency was essential for trade, taxation, and economic integration. Perhaps most significantly, the Persian principle of religious tolerance left a deep mark on history. The Achaemenid approach, respecting local gods, supporting local temples, allowing diverse religious practices within the imperial framework, was unusual in the ancient world and remarkably successful. It provided a model for how empires could govern diverse populations without attempting to impose religious uniformity. This principle would be adopted, to varying degrees, by many later empires, from the Romans to the Islamic caliphates to the Ottomans. The liberation of the Jews from Babylonian captivity and the support for rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem had profound effects on Jewish history and theology. Cyrus became a figure of immense importance in Jewish tradition, praised in the Hebrew Bible as God's anointed one. This positive view of a Gentile ruler was unusual and reflected the genuine benefits that Persian rule brought to the Jewish community. The experience of Persian tolerance would shape Jewish expectations of how empires should treat minority religions. Zoroastrianism, the religion that developed and flourished under Persian rule, had its own lasting impact. Though it never became a major world religion in terms of numbers, its influence on later religious thought was significant. The Zoroastrian concept of cosmic dualism, the struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, truth and the lie, influenced Judaism during and after the exile, and through Judaism affected Christianity and Islam. Concepts of heaven and hell, of a final judgment, of the world as a battleground between divine forces, all show Zoroastrian influence. The Sasanian Empire, which arose in Iran in the 3rd century AD, explicitly claimed to be the successor to the Achaemenids. The Sasanians saw themselves as restoring Persian glory after centuries of foreign rule, first Hellenistic, then Parthian. They revived many Achaemenid traditions, created art and architecture that echoed Achaemenid models, and promoted Zoroastrianism as a state religion. Though the Sasanians were eventually conquered by the Islamic caliphates in the 7th century, they demonstrated the enduring power of the Achaemenid legacy in Iranian consciousness. The Islamic conquest of Iran in the 7th century brought dramatic changes, but it did not erase Persian identity or culture. The Persians maintained their linguistic and cultural distinctiveness within the Islamic world. Persian became one of the great languages of Islamic civilization, used for poetry, philosophy, and administration alongside Arabic. Persian administrative traditions influenced the Abbasid Caliphate and later Islamic empires. The Persian concept of kingship, the idea of the Shah as a divinely appointed ruler maintaining cosmic order, survived in Islamic garb. In modern Iran, the Achaemenid Empire holds a special place in national consciousness. Cyrus the Great is revered as the founder of the Iranian nation, a symbol of Persian greatness and wisdom. Persepolis is a source of immense pride, featured on currency and stamps, visited by schoolchildren and tourists alike. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 19th century excavations of Babylon and now housed in the British Museum, has been described by some Iranians as the world's first charter of human rights, an exaggeration certainly, but one that speaks to the desire to see Cyrus as an enlightened ruler whose principles resonate with modern values. This modern Iranian nationalism often looks past the Islamic period to claim direct descent from the Achaemenids, seeing Cyrus and Darius as the true representatives of Iranian identity. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 initially downplayed pre-Islamic history, but even the Islamic Republic has gradually recognized the importance of the Achaemenid legacy. Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebration that predates Islam and has roots in the Zoroastrian calendar, is enthusiastically celebrated in Iran and throughout the Persian cultural sphere. The art and architecture of the Achaemenids influenced styles across a vast region. The columned halls, the use of relief sculptures, the fusion of elements from different cultures into a coherent artistic vision, all became part of the visual language of empire. Later dynasties, from the Parthians to the Mughals, drew on Achaemenid precedents. The very concept of monumental royal architecture, designed to awe and impress, to proclaim power and legitimacy, owes much to what the Achaemenids created at Pasargadae and Persepolis. The multilingual inscriptions at Achaemenid sites, presenting royal decrees in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, reflected a practical necessity in a multilingual empire. But they also represented an ideology. The empire encompassed many peoples, and all had a place within it. This principle of linguistic and cultural accommodation within an imperial framework would be adopted by many later empires, though not always with the same success. The Behistun inscription, that massive text carved into a cliff face by Darius I, played an unexpected role in modern scholarship. In the 19th century, a British officer named Henry Rawlinson, working from copies he had made of the inscription, used the trilingual text to decipher cuneiform script, the Old Persian portion, which used a simpler script and whose language was related to modern Persian, provided the key to understanding Elamite and Akkadian. This breakthrough opened up the entire written record of ancient Mesopotamia, allowing scholars to read Babylonian, Assyrian, and Sumerian texts. The Persians, in their desire to proclaim their legitimacy in multiple languages, had unwittingly provided the Rosetta Stone for Mesopotamian studies. In the realm of ideas, the Persian Empire contributed the model of the benevolent universal ruler, the king who brings order and justice to diverse peoples. This concept, present in the propaganda of Cyrus and Darius, would influence political thought for centuries. Alexander adopted it, presenting himself as the successor to the Achaemenids rather than as a foreign conqueror. The Roman emperors, particularly in the eastern part of the empire, drew on similar ideas. Medieval Islamic rulers claimed the title of Shah-in-Shah, King of Kings, an Achaemenid title. The very word satrap entered multiple languages, a reminder of the Persian administrative system. Even today, the word is used to describe provincial governors, or, more pejoratively, subordinate rulers who owe their position to a more powerful patron. The word carries with it echoes of the Persian system, where satraps wielded enormous power, but remained ultimately dependent on royal favor. Standing at Persepolis today, looking at the ruins of the Apadana with its procession of tribute bearers frozen in stone, it is possible to see the empire's legacy, embodied in physical form. Here were representatives of 23 nations, from India to Ethiopia, from Libya to Central Asia, all participating in a ritual of submission and incorporation. The message was clear. Diversity could be encompassed within unity. Many peoples could form a single order. It was propaganda, certainly, but it was also a vision, and visions have power. The empire that Cyrus founded, and that Darius systematized, was not perfect. It was built on conquest and maintained by force. It extracted tribute, sometimes harshly. It suppressed rebellions brutally, when necessary. But compared to other empires of its time, compared to the Assyrians who came before, or the Romans who would come after, the Persian approach was relatively benign. The principle of tolerance, the willingness to work within existing structures, the respect for local customs, these represented a different way of ruling, one that brought benefits as well as burdens to subject peoples. The empire lasted for over 2 centuries, from 550 to 330 BC, controlling at its height the largest territory any empire had yet held. It connected the Mediterranean world with Central Asia and India, facilitating trade and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Ideas, technologies, artistic styles, and peoples moved along the roads and sea routes of the empire, creating a cosmopolitan culture that would profoundly influence the Hellenistic world that followed. The fall of the empire was swift and dramatic. But the systems it created, the ideas it embodied, the model of governance it pioneered, these survived. They were adopted, adapted, and transmitted by the empires that succeeded it. From the Seleucids to the Romans, from the Parthians to the Sasanians, from the Islamic caliphates to the Ottomans and Mughals, elements of the Achaemenid system can be traced. In the modern world, when we think about how to govern diverse populations, how to balance central authority with local autonomy, how to build infrastructure to connect vast territories, we are still grappling with challenges the Persians faced, and in their own way solved. The specific solutions they developed may not be applicable to the modern world, but the problems they addressed, how to hold a large, diverse empire together without resorting to constant terror and oppression, remain relevant. The tomb of Cyrus still stands at Pasargadae, that simple, elegant structure rising from its stepped platform. The inscription that once adorned it has long since vanished, but its words, recorded by ancient visitors, still resonate. I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians. Grudge me not, therefore, this little earth that covers my body. It is a plea across the centuries, asking to be remembered, asking for the monument to be respected. The empire Cyrus founded is gone. The capitals are ruins. The kings are dust. The language is dead, preserved only in inscriptions. The religion survives only in small communities scattered across the world. But the legacy endures. In the structures of governance we inherit, in the principle that diverse peoples can coexist within a single political order, in the idea that tolerance and pragmatism can be more effective than terror and uniformity, in the roads that still follow ancient routes, in the stones that still proclaim Persian glory. In all of these, the Persian Empire lives on. The wind moves across the Iranian plateau, as it has for millennia. It carries dust from Persepolis, where the columns still stand sentinel over a plain that was once the center of the world. It flows past Pasargadae, where Cyrus sleeps in his monument. It crosses the mountains where the royal road once ran, connecting cities and peoples, facilitating the flow of goods and ideas that shaped the ancient world. The empires of the ancient Near East rose and fell, Sumer and Akkad, Assyria and Babylon, Egypt and Lydia. Each left its mark, each contributed to the long story of human civilization. But none achieved what Persia achieved: the creation of a system that could hold together vast territories and diverse peoples, not just through force, but through a calculated mixture of power and tolerance, ambition and pragmatism, conquest and incorporation. The Persian Empire was not the last great empire of the ancient world, but it was in many ways the most influential. It provided a model that would be studied, admired, adapted, and imitated for over 2 millennia. Kings and emperors from Alexander to Akbar, from Augustus to Suleiman, from Justinian to Napoleon, all drew on precedents the Persians established. The idea of empire itself, not just as conquest, but as governance, as the organization of diverse peoples into a functioning whole, owes much to what the Achaemenids created. In the end, the legacy is not just in what survived, the monuments, the inscriptions, the coins, the roads, but in the ideas that were set in motion, the idea that an empire could be more than just a vehicle for exploitation, that it could bring order and prosperity, as well as tribute and taxes. The idea that diverse peoples could be incorporated rather than destroyed, that tolerance could be a tool of statecraft as effective as terror. The idea that infrastructure, roads, communication systems, standardized administration, was essential to holding large territories together. These ideas did not die when Darius III died, or when Persepolis burned. They were picked up by Alexander and his successors, by the Romans and the Parthians, by the Islamic caliphates, and the empires that followed them. They shaped the political landscape of the ancient and medieval worlds, and continue to influence how we think about governance and empire today. The Persian Empire, that vast construction of power and vision, ambition and pragmatism, fell after 2 centuries. But what it built, the systems, the precedents, the model of how to rule a diverse empire, outlasted the dynasty that created it. In that sense, Cyrus and Darius achieved something more lasting than conquest. They created ideas that would shape history for millennia, long after their empire had passed into memory, long after their capitals had crumbled into dust. The stones of Persepolis stand beneath the Iranian sun, weathered by wind and time. Tourists walk where once tribute bearers processed, where kings received the homage of nations. The columns reach toward the sky, supporting nothing now but memory and air. And yet, in their endurance, in their silent testimony to what once was, they remind us that empires may fall but legacies endure. The Persian Empire is gone, but its echoes still sound across the centuries, still shape our world in ways both obvious and subtle, still speak to us of power and possibility, of ambition and achievement, of the enduring human desire to build something greater than ourselves, something that will outlast our brief time on Earth. The wind moves on, carrying dust and memory, and the stones remain, witnesses to glory that was and legacy that endures.